The Transplant Dilemma, Spiritual or Non-Spiritual, by Tymn. Can one be spiritual and not spiritual at the same time? That was the question that came to mind while watching the movie Two Hearts on television a few nights ago. It is based on a true story involving a multiple organ donation by a young man named Christopher. The last 5 minutes of the film looked in upon those who had received his organs. The middle-aged man who received his lungs said that the donor is now breathing through him, and that he would do his best to live a good life for him, or some such words. Something was said suggesting that Chris could now see through the eyes of the person who received his eyes. In effect, Christopher's life was now their life. When Samantha, Christopher's fiancée, hugged one of the recipients, she commented that she felt Christopher was there with her. The viewer might very well have concluded that Christopher's soul, in addition to his body, had been divided up among the recipients. Either that, or there is no such thing as a surviving soul. The idea that Christopher's consciousness, or soul, lived on, independent of the lives of the organ recipients, was completely ignored by the scriptwriters. Even though the movie was likely intended as a spiritual and heartwarming one, I viewed it as having a materialistic or nihilistic message, not a truly spiritual one. Another paradox to add to those in my last blog here. Certainly, donating one's organs to those in need of them seems like a spiritual act, one of kindness, of all giving and no taking, of human love and service. To suggest that it is other than spiritually proper is to raise eyebrows and invite ridicule, scorn, and contempt. Isn't helping others what spirituality is all about? Nevertheless, there are indications that organ transplants are metaphysically contraindicated, both for the donor and recipient. The primary issue is whether the consciousness of the donor actually leaves the body at the moment brainwave activity and vital functions cease, or whether it lingers for hours or even days. If individual consciousness does linger, is it negatively affected by hasty organ removal? In his 1998 book, Light and Death, Michael Sabam, an Atlanta cardiologist, cites an article by Dr. Linda Emanuel, who comments that life and death are viewed as non-overlapping dichotomous states, whereas in reality there is no threshold event that defines death. Several scientific observations support Emanuel's argument that loss of biologic life, including death of the brain, is process and does not occur at a single, definite moment, Sabam states. He goes on to mention that 10 organ donors diagnosed as brain dead showed an average increase in blood pressure of 31 millimeters of mercury and in heart rate of 23 beats per minute in response to surgical removal of the organs. He also refers to a study at Loyola University Medical Center in which it was found that 20% of patients diagnosed as brain dead had persisting EEG activity up to 7 days after the initial diagnosis. In his 2010 book, Consciousness Beyond Life, Pim van Lommel, a world-renowned cardiologist, devotes several interesting pages to the organ transplant issue, pointing out that when brain death has been diagnosed, 96% of the body is still alive. While stating that he is not in principle opposed to organ transplants, Van Lommel suggests that more consideration should be given to the non-physical aspects of organ donation, including the fear of death. Van Lommel further comments that most people are unaware that when an organ is removed from dead patients, it usually requires general anesthesia of the individual because of violent reflexes by the certified dead organ donor. Severing the silver cord, according to the mystic known as Abdru Shin, 1875-1941, the separation of the etheric body, or soul, from the physical body, and the severing of the silver cord, sometimes referred to as the etheric umbilical cord. Joining the two depends to a great extent on the spiritual development of the individual. Dr. Richard Steinpach, who wrote extensively on the teachings of Abdru Shin, states that the more materialistic the person, the more the silver cord is tightly knit, and the more difficult it is to sever the connection. The severance may then take many days, during which time such a person, because of the density of the connection cord, must still feel what happens to his physical body, so that, for example, he does not necessarily remain insensitive to cremation, Steinbach offers, adding that it is with good reason that some rites, especially among primitive races, provide for minimum intervals between death and burial or cremation. Reports that workers relocating cemeteries in Great Britain have found scratch marks on the inside covers of many caskets, indicating that the body was not yet dead when the cover was closed, add to the concern. Of course, the cemetery victims were likely buried before embalming became commonplace, but that only indicates that embalming may now begin before bodies are actually dead. According to the Tibetan Book of the Dead, it might take up to 3.5 days for the consciousness to leave the body. Allan Kardec, Augustus de Morgan, and other pioneers of psychical research concluded that the difficulty a spirit has in freeing itself from the physical body is in proportion to its lower desires. Thus, the advanced spirits separate quickly, while the more earthbound spirits find difficulty in achieving separation. Indications are that some earthbound spirits achieve separation but still cling to the body, apparently not recognizing they are dead and living in a dream world. In his 1916 book, Raymond or Life and Death, Sir Oliver Lodge, an esteemed British physicist and radio pioneer, in a séance with medium Gladys Osborne Leonard, discussed the subject with Raymond, his deceased son. Raymond told him that the body doesn't start mortifying until the spirit has left it. He went on to tell his father that he had witnessed a scene several days earlier in which a man was going to be cremated 2 days after the doctor pronounced him dead. When his relatives on this side heard about it, they brought a certain doctor on our side, and when they saw that the spirit hadn't got really out of the body, they magnetized it and helped it out. Raymond explained through Fida, Leonard's spirit control. But there was still a cord, and it had to be severed rather quickly, and it gave a little shock to the spirit, like as if you had something amputated. But it had to be done. Raymond suggested that there should be a 7-day waiting period before cremation. People are so careless, he said. The idea seems to be, hurry up and get them out of the way now that they are dead. If it is true that Jesus took from Friday afternoon until Sunday to achieve complete separation, what hope is there that the rest of us can do it instantly? Perhaps we are talking about different spiritual phenomena. Possession. There are indications that premature removal of organs can result in the possession of the recipient by the donor, causing the donor to remain earthbound and the recipient to be negatively influenced. In A Change of Heart, author Claire Sylvia tells of her own heart transplant and how she took on some of the tastes and interests of the donor. Although I couldn't yet put this idea into words, I now believe that what made me so confused and disoriented during my early days in ICU were the first stirrings of another presence inside me, Sylvia writes. Increasingly, in the months ahead, I would have the feeling that some aspect of my donor's spirit or personality existed within me. Sylvia reports taking on an affinity for green peppers, something she had never liked before. She also began craving beer and chicken nuggets, as well as becoming more masculine in personality and taking an interest in motorcycles. She continued feeling a presence with her. I noticed that I no longer felt lonely, even when I was by myself, she explains. Sometimes I had the feeling that somebody else was in there with me, that in some intangible way, my sense of I had become a kind of we. Although I couldn't always detect this extra presence, at times it almost felt as if a second soul were sharing my body. Sylvia investigated and found out that her heart came from an 18-year-old male, the victim of a motorcycle accident. She met his family and found out that her new tastes and interests were those of her donor. She interviewed other transplant recipients and found that they also had acquired the interests, traits, and tastes of the donor. One recipient had a great fear of water before her transplant, but after it, she had a great desire for swimming and sailing. She found out that her donor had been an avid sailor who died in a boating accident. Another recipient, a born-again Christian, seemed completely out of character when he began cursing and swearing after the transplant. It was discovered that the donor frequently used such vulgar language. The scientific explanation for all that is cellular memory, not possession, and if that is a valid explanation, there is less reason for concern. Lazarus syndrome. Every now and then, we hear about someone declared clinically dead, coming back to life on his or her deathbed or even on the autopsy table. The story of Dr. George Rodonaya, a psychologist in the Soviet Union, as related in several books on near-death experiences, is a particularly chilling one. As medical personnel began cutting into him during an autopsy nearly 2 days after his death, Rodonaya opened his eyes and returned to life. He returned with a very vivid near-death experience, one that transformed him from a nihilist to a believer. Indications are that this phenomenon is grossly underreported. As I see it, there are essentially 4 concerns here relating to organ harvesting. 1. Does the soul, or consciousness, exist and live on independent of the body? 2. If it continues to exist, when does it achieve separation from the body? 3. If consciousness has not separated from the body at the time of organ harvesting, are there negative effects on the soul or consciousness? 4. Can possession or cellular memory have a negative effect on the organ recipient? The dilemma appears much the same as that of abortion, at which the question is when the soul inhabits the body, at conception, any time during the pregnancy, or at birth. The answers seem beyond both science and religion. Of course, science doesn't officially recognize the existence of the soul, while religions can give their own interpretations to various sacred writings. Next blog post, November 3rd.